feel like the opportunity to talk about Sonic Unleashed has long since passed me by. It's been nearly 2 decades, and it's had several renaissance moments, to the point where I could comfortably call it slightly divisive at worst. Recently, Sonic Unleashed recompiled hit the internet, and everyone lost their minds, pouring out a huge thank you for myself for narrowly preventing me from purchasing an Xbox, by the way. Thanks for that. This wave of support genuinely shocked me. Mentally, my brain is stuck back near its release, when it was aggressively ridiculed, and maybe in those days, it would have warranted a defense piece as someone who fell in love with it when it came out. Defending Unleashed doesn't make much sense anymore. I'd hazard a guess that it's more uncommon to find a truly scathing opinion about it, which is cool. Love to see the world course-correcting itself. Nevertheless, I'm left with this passionate need to express why this game means so much to me, how it's shaped the way I think about video games, and why it's helped forge a lifelong connection to this children's franchise that I will never be able to escape. What a strange life I live. Sonic Unleashed means a lot to me, in a way I haven't seen anyone articulate, so maybe it's worth howling at the moon for a while about the surprisingly poignant questions it asks about franchises and fundamental truths. In the eyes of many, the daytime levels have purpose because they most resemble what Sonic is. It's such a common opinion, you will rarely hear anyone argue against it. These are high-speed platforming levels where Sonic finally breaks the sound barrier. You fly through stages so fast that the music playing gets drowned out by the sound of you slicing through air, crashing into enemies and obstacles unlucky enough to find themselves in your path. Up to this point, the spin dash was the only tool Sonic could use to gain speed from a standstill. Otherwise, you had to use the level design to maintain your flow, curling into a ball on inclines. The adventure games had more straightforward level design and less opportunities to utilize momentum in favor of giving players access to a far more powerful spin dash. The boost is a souped-up spin dash, giving Sonic a burst of speed that doesn't fall off, provided you still have meter to spend. This mechanic debuted in Sonic Rush, a 2D Sonic which had a profound impact on the direction of this style of Sonic after the Advance games. Suddenly, levels were far faster, and maintaining momentum was much more difficult. For a franchise about speed, it seems like a logical next step to crank up the dial and see how fast you can make him run before it spirals out of control. Unleashed takes after its design philosophy with levels focused around quick reaction timing. As such, these levels are longer and narrower, with more ring trails to lightspeed dash through, walls to jump on, and dash pads to stomp down on. Maintaining a flow state in Unleashed is much more reactive. If you see a couple of boost panels below you, it would make sense to stomp down on them as part of your platforming chain, and so levels build themselves around moments like this. There are small gaps you need to quickly slide under, and split-second jumps to make that launch you onto a higher path. I've oft likened their pacing to a difficult rhythm game, as their flow states are nearly identical. It feels awful to screw something up in an Unleashed level. It instantly shatters that hypnotic trance. Sonic has always been a series about learning the levels and playing them repeatedly until you've mastered them. Going fast was obviously one of the inspirations behind the character, but it is worth noting that the original game had a speed cap, which would go on to be lifted in subsequent games. Sonic's only gotten faster and faster, at least theoretically. That makes a certain kind of sense, as this is the most obvious way to continue a series or franchise, outdoing your previous efforts. Go bigger, bolder, and quicker. Sonic Unleashed nudges against the breaking point of that philosophy, as it's noticeably harder to come to grips with than his other playstyles. I can't imagine Sonic running much faster than this without it being impossible to control, and it's likely why these levels feel more like roller coasters than jungle gyms. For my money, the boost is a brilliant addition to the series, specifically as it's used in Unleashed. Contrary to popular belief, you really shouldn't be using it all the time. In the footage you'll see here, I am boosting all the time, as I know the levels like the back of my hand. But when you're first going through them, it's not really a good idea to lay on the gas all the time. That's how you'll end up blasting past shortcuts and barreling into danger. There are interactions the boost has with other abilities that have anti-synergy. As a kid, I could never clear this wide-ass turn in Skyscraper Scamper. The drift introduced to you in Savannah Citadel is clearly what you're supposed to use to bank this turn, but without guardrails, boosting while you drift is a death sentence. For that reason, I used to maintain that Sonic Generations had a superior drift, since it had a much sharper turn angle. It's just so much easier, and most people seem to agree with that. In retrospect, I think I missed the point of the Unleashed drift. You need to force yourself to slow down at the right time, make sure you're drifting at the correct angle, and then boost out of it to continue the level. That takes a lot more consideration than in Generations, where the drift may as well be a glorified turn. When you play some of the extra levels which require the drift, you'll be forced to learn its ins and outs pretty quickly. This side act of Savannah Citadel seems to invite that growth. Perfecting this level forced me to consider the physics of drifting, that it actually makes sense to bank towards the outer edge of a curve due to the way your drifting arc will emulate its shape. Trying to drift towards the inner ring with speed will force you off the edge. In Generations, you do exactly the opposite, since the turn radius is so small that you can clear virtually anything. This difference between the two games is emblematic of their distinct design philosophies. Generations is slower, with more open 3D platforming segments, while Unleashed reserves those moments for its 2D sections, using its 3D sections to instead focus on drifting or dodging falling debris while you rocket across bodies of water. Generally, Unleashed is much more about the thrill of your speed, with levels like Cool Edge and Jungle Joyride being some of my favorites. These sections where you run across the water are an interesting spin on the water levels of the classics. In those games, being underwater felt really bad. Your movement was halted, your jumps had moon gravity, so your aim was to be out of the water for as long as possible. Levels like Aquatic Ruin even let skilled players stay out of the water, as long as they never fell from the top pathway. In Unleashed, water is yet another test for you to overcome, as you run over it. Slow down and you'll fall right through, so in these sections, making mistakes and losing your speed is deadly. Some of the side levels, which have you jumping over obstacles while running on the water, are insane. You really feel the pressure to thread the needle when a single mistake means instant death. It's such a cool way to reintroduce that philosophy in a way that fits this evolution of Sonic gameplay. Unleashed breeds tension, ensuring that every little mistake magnifies your frustration. Your boost meter's filled mostly by ring energy, and the more rings you have, the faster you run. Getting hit by anything will cut your ring count in half, slowing you down in more ways than one. Your initial boost also drains more than a continuous one, so needing to initiate another boost will bring you closer to empty. It's no wonder reviewers at the time would compare this style of play to racing games, as the way you need to control them in a 3D space is very similar. Many side acts in Unleashed have several laps to complete. You have a speedometer on the bottom left, checkpoints show you how fast you were going, they introduced a damn drift to his moveset. I think this genre was a conscious inspiration behind his increased speed. Racing is one of the only other genres I can think of where a time trial mode is expected, so it's a pretty snug fit for the type of game Sonic aims to be. S-ranks in Unleashed are tight, relying both on a high ring count and time cleared. A death not only resets your point total and ring count, it also doesn't reset your timer, which is a triple whammy of punishment. To get an S rank, you essentially need to do a flawless run of the fastest pathway with very little leeway. If you were to count the amount of times I hit restart in every Sonic game, Unleashed would have the highest number by far. It's a playstyle that demands perfection, all done in an effort to make conquering that challenge feel electrifying. In no other Sonic game does an S rank feel this good to get. That translucent, shiny S flashing onto the screen while Sonic freaks the hell out. It's an unparalleled sense of satisfaction. I am not exaggerating when I say that this kind of speed had not been felt before. It's interesting how the other version of Unleashed handles this approach on inferior technology. You can't move nearly as fast, so your boost is a much more limited tool. You instead use it to gain short bursts of speed that fall off after a few seconds, replenishing the meter by action chaining. Those actions can include collecting rings, defeating enemies, or pulling off a drift. The trick is, if you take too long between actions, you'll lose your chain, and higher chains mean more boost. Levels become about learning when and where to boost. Some sections won't have much in the way of action chaining, so spamming the boost will leave you high and dry during sections where having it would let you clear much faster. Maybe it would make sense to save some of it then. You already can't boost all the time, especially in 3D, as boosting cannot be cancelled and also locks you in a straight line. Ironically, in its more limited form, boosting is much more of a commitment. They lean into this by having Sonic bonk into walls if you hit them dead on, or scrape against them if you don't quite make a sharp enough turn. Your goal then is usually to boost into dash panels, which will maintain your speed and redirect your movement. Boosting into every panel is a bad idea though, since many of them don't logically flow into the next, so you need to decide which dash panels are worth using your boost on. Multi-tiered pathways feel more like the classics in this regard, since a failure to abide by these rules will mean that you're locked out of the higher, or in this case faster, pathway. That's not something that can really happen in the same way in HD Unleashed, where finding the fastest pathway is a little less intuitive. Levels like Adabat have several sections where you can choose whether to go left or right, taking you on two separate tracks, and it's never quite clear which one is faster in the same way it is for the 2D sections. SD Unleashed is even more constricted, using its boxed-in levels to construct a more explicit high and low structure in 3D. They might appear similar on the surface, but they feel pretty distinct. I've seen a decent amount of people who prefer these more limited daytime levels because of what those limitations force you to consider, and how they might align better with classical Sonic design tendencies. I like the levels too, but I find myself coming back to HD Unleashed a lot more, which is fascinating, as it is a lot more of a departure from how momentum-driven Sonic had striven to be. There's no curling into a ball on inclines to generate and maintain your speed, using that as a tool to reach higher pathways and secret areas. Now it's about avoiding obstacles at a breakneck pace. I would argue both styles of play achieve very similar things, but it's undeniable that this is a big shift in design philosophy. Unleashed, in that way, is not faithful to the classic titles in the way that a lot of fans would probably want. If you've been watching me for a while, you'd likely know that I don't care. I know this set of levels about as well as I know my own damn house. I've played them over and over and over and over and over again, and I will never get sick of them. As much as I have played them, I haven't even breached the upper limit of what you can do with Sonic here. Drifts, stomps, and quick steps can be chained together in order to breeze past Sonic's speed cap, used in speedruns to pull off some heinous skips. I already struggle with Unleashed, and it terrifies me a little to watch speedruns and wonder if I'm ever going to be able to perform tricks that precise. It excites me that the opportunity will always be there, though. The skill ceiling is so high that even after playing the game many times throughout my life, there is still more for me to learn in a way that I don't quite feel with some other Sonic games that are a little more traditional, which isn't to discount SD Unleashed. There's tech to learn. It's just never going to reach the out-of-control ferocity of HD Unleashed, and that's okay. I view SD Unleashed much like I do Mania. A more controlled, reasonable pace with interesting moment-to-moment decision-making. Loving HD Unleashed doesn't mean I no longer boot up Mania and play around in its expertly crafted momentum playgrounds. This ain't a zero-sum game. I can love and appreciate both styles of what Sonic can be. In my eyes, the more, the merrier, Two different Sonic games for two different moods, and both get to be in my top 5. I think it's quite frankly awesome that there's another version of Unleashed, following the same story with the same music, that offers a completely different gameplay experience. Rather than pit them together and pick a victor, I'd rather simply love them both. And you can't stop me. So yeah, Daytime Sonic, pretty damn cool, no matter what console you had growing up. But hey, surely there is no excusing the Werehog, right? I may have enjoyed mech shooting and treasure hunting, but there's just no way I could enjoy the Werehog. It's the antithesis of Sonic. Yeah. So. By night, Sonic undergoes a werewolf-esque transformation which robs him of his signature speed, forcing him to throw hands with his enemies and do some slower, more standard 3D platforming. Most people feel that this does not belong in Sonic, but I'm gonna leave that question at the door for a moment, and simply consider the Werehog on its own terms. Sonic has a lot of different combo strings which are meant to serve different purposes. He has some strings meant to guard break, some meant to do a lot of damage to a single opponent, multiple strings that launch enemies into the air, and several different juggling options. He can grab any enemy, provided their health is low, and swing them around for crowd control, or throw them to snipe faraway threats. There's a heft to the sound design that makes each punch, kick, and scratch feel visceral. The metal clang of the Eggman robots activates my neurons in the same way it does for Daytime Sonic. I can't help but corral them together and do the fist pound move. Maybe you're juggling an enemy with a ton of others waiting below you, so you pile drive him into the ground, doing tons of AoE damage. Alternatively, you could punch him into the ground, which will cause a blowback effect and free up some space for you to continue pummeling a few enemies. Or maybe you just belly flop onto the ground and break the enemy's guard, only to follow up with a long AoE string. The Werehog's fun to mess around with. This playthrough I decided to level up nothing except my combat skill, which unlocked all my moves. At base strength and health, this was an occasionally brutal test of my combat prowess. Enemies are surprisingly aggressive, surrounding you in packs, capable of interrupting you. You can cancel into a shield whenever you want, provided you keep an eye on what this horde of enemies will do, making brawls quite fair. The question is how efficiently you can bypass enemy groups, while still racking up enough points to get the S rank at the end. This is what I find so brilliant about the playstyle. You need to find a balance between stylish combat and speedy play. Time bonus matters a lot, as lowering it can mean a rank's worth of difference. You can't rely on speed entirely though, illustrated by levels like Rooftop Run, which can only attain A ranks even when speedrunners glitch out of bounds. Achieving long combo strings with a lot of hits will contribute bonuses to your point scoring, as well as executing low health enemies with finishers. The thing is, not every enemy is created equal. Lower tier enemies are worth less when executed. You need to pick and choose which foes you want to finish off for their bonus points, usually higher tier Dark Gaia monsters and the mini-bosses. Executions eat into your time as they're somewhat drawn out QTEs with long animations, encouraging as few of them as you can fit in. In effect, each level turns into this puzzle, where you're trying to figure out what the fastest way through any given encounter is without forfeiting those bonus points. You have a lot of tools in your toolbox meant to rack up combo points, but you also have access to your Unleashed state, which makes your attacks stronger, lets you chain combos infinitely, and also makes you immune to hit stun. There are good and bad times to let Unleashed mode rip, since you can't turn it off. You almost get a full bar worth for defeating mini-bosses, and a full room of mooks will probably keep gas in the tank depending on how quickly you mow through them. While you can't keep this state indefinitely, you can keep it running for several rooms of encounters, and it's one of the most effective ways to get that time bonus as high as possible. It isn't enough to mindlessly spam your way through hordes of mooks. Some rooms are not mandatory, so you'll need to decide whether certain enemies are worth defeating. Will higher value targets make up the loss of time spent defeating them? It's true that games like Devil May Cry 5 have a lot more going on, and a lot more to learn. Stylish play in that game goes well beyond what Unleashed can offer, but one of the cool things about the Werehog's kit is that it isn't exclusively used for combat. Many of these levels have segments focused around platforming. This is some Crash Bandicoot type shit, do or die sections above bottomless pits. Skyscraper Scamper and several side acts are mostly platforming of this variety, and they're really cool. Your aerial attacks give you a lot of height and distance, which can be used to get Sonic across gaps he shouldn't be able to clear normally. He also has a mid-air drill attack, which not only gives him a lot of grounded distance, increasing his general speed, but can be used strategically on higher platforms for a ridiculous amount of distance. Skyscraper Scamper is one of my favorite levels due to sections like these, with tight ropes to walk across. You're introduced to this in Windmill Isle with guardrails, a lot like the drift segments in Savannah Citadel Day. Isn't that curious? It's easier to cross these tight ropes since they let you grab onto them when you fall. Pro gamers watching know that your mid-air grab can be cancelled with a jump, maintaining your momentum and rocketing you into the air like a slingshot. Rather than walk across these beams, then, it's faster to launch your way through them like an acrobat. In Skyscraper Scamper, you have no such luxury. And they are narrow beams, meaning your window to jump onto them is tight. You could slowly walk across the beam if you're a coward, or you could try to fly your way through them with the mid-air punch attack and shave off a full minute from your overall level time. The tension is real, since like Daytime Sonic, a single death will reset all of your points. It's harder than it looks, trust me. This is an element that's so fun to mess around with that its absence punches a hole straight through the SD version of the playstyle. It controls almost identically, with a dash, double jump, and the ability to cling onto poles and ledges. Only problem is, there's no way to cancel out of these actions, so whenever you find yourself in a climbing section, the level screeches to a halt as you slowly clumber your way through. Is that a word? Clumber? Well, Googling the word clumber brought up the dog breed Clumber Spaniel. So no, I don't think clumber is the word that I'm thinking of here. One of my favorite sections in HD Unleashed is the Clock Tower of Rooftop Run. It's a giant jungle gym that you can shred your way through, skipping whole segments by slingshotting yourself. It's a wonderful set piece, both day and night, showing how both versions of Sonic navigate this obstacle with their unique abilities. A section like this could not exist in SD Unleashed, or your time spent in it would be tripled. Daytime Sonic was an instance where it was able to use its more limited hardware and Wii Remote control scheme to its advantage. The Werehog here feels wholly limited by it, with less fluid platforming and combat opportunities. There are less combo strings to work with, and they're each controlled using the L and R buttons to alternate between your left and right fists. This was done in order to allow you to punch using motion controls with the Wiimote and Nunchuck. That has its own funny novelty. And there's actually a little more depth to it than you might imagine, where alternating between the punches in certain orders will produce different strings. You can still launch enemies into the air, you just can't really do much to them while they're up there, since your aerial combat options are practically non-existent. Occasionally, I'd end up throwing out moves I never intended to, getting lost in how many punches I had thrown out and which hand I'd started with. Getting a running start is done by tapping the control stick twice in the same direction. It works for Kirby. Here is very unintuitive and makes dash attacks a lot less fun, as well as complicating general platforming. The Werehog is one of the slippiest bastards I've ever had the pleasure of controlling. Kind of an unfortunate translation, even if the attacks still have satisfying sound design and I enjoy exploring them for red capsules. Really makes me appreciate the sense of flow the HD levels have and how short they can be when you master them. None of these levels exceed 6 or 7 minutes when you're ripping through them, and in fact, several of them can be cleared in 3 or 4 minutes, like Daytime Sonic. See, there's this idea that the Werehog levels are super long. On your first playthrough, this is probably true. You won't have access to all your combos, your strength and health will be low, and deaths are much more likely to occur. You'll be combing the level for Sun and Moon medals, if you even know you're going to need them, and you won't know a few of the shortcuts yet. Again, since deaths don't reset the timer, that can balloon your time spent in a level. When you know what you're doing though, the max amount of time you'll spend in a level is maybe 8 minutes, specifically in Cool Edge for whatever reason, and that's not even true for shorter levels like Jungle Joyride or Dragon Road. Here are my S-rank times for the various levels, which aren't even fully optimized yet and don't make use of glitches. I suppose if you consider jumping onto this fence in arid sands, glitching through the game, instead of pushing the block over, then yeah. I am kinda guilty of doing that. You can skip all but the first block pushing puzzle in Savannah Citadel, through both intended and maybe unintended means, shaving a ton of time off your run. Some of these launch skips are just high enough with coded collision that I really do wonder whether the devs knew about how much height and distance you could get, and just rolled with the knowledge that you could probably bypass slower sections like this. Unleashed mode, allowing you to chain combos, can lead to stuff like this, where you infinite chain your way past this whole bit in Empire City, meaning the Werehog has its own bag of tricks for speedrunning. This is still a Sonic game at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how polished you attempt to make the experience. A game with this much speed and this many tools, which are built to be played a million times, will have holes in them that players will exploit, intended or otherwise. There are little bits of level design that convince me this was the development philosophy anyway. At the end of Dragon Road, there's a horde of enemies hanging out on some shallow water. Earlier in the level, you throw an electric enemy at some dark Gaia plants and instantly kill them as they're close to the water. And here, there's a hidden section off to the left with another electric enemy, which kills everything in one fell swoop. These kinds of shortcuts wouldn't exist if you weren't being encouraged to beat these levels as quickly as possible. I guess the question is, does this speedy mentality mean that it is Sonic the Hedgehog? What are the essential elements of Sonic anyway? Is it about momentum, speedrunning, platforming? I approach the Werehog levels with the same sick fervor that I do the daytime levels. This style of play rewards tricky jumps and shortcuts, as well as strategic use of your combos to deal with enemies as efficiently as possible. On the surface, these two styles of play couldn't be more different, but in practice, they're far more alike than you could ever imagine. That contrast between two supposed extremes is where Unleashed thrives. Both of these styles forsake the franchise's roots in completely different directions. One could be considered an evolution, and another a devolution. It's almost like they were built to be at odds with each other. Sonic Unleashed is a game where you travel the planet, putting its fractured pieces back together and solving people's woes along the way. These problems often seem mundane. In Spagonia, you deal in matters of love, both romantic and familial. In Shamar, you help a father realize that his son wants to pursue a career as a musician, rather than a carpenter. You follow him to Empire City, where you help make his dream into a reality. The American dream, am I right? Ah, man. It's bad here. Along the way, you run into vendors, which each sell foods native to the region. You can feed them to Chip, and he'll have all sorts of stuff to say about them. Through doing side stuff like this, you'll unlock little cutscenes of Sonic and Chip hanging out, battling for the last dumpling, or trying to bite into a frozen piece of chocolate. There's actually a lot of optional stuff here that I guarantee a majority of people who played Unleashed have never engaged with. I sure as hell didn't do this stuff when I was a kid. I was far too impatient for that. As such, I ran into a problem that most people share. I never had enough Sun and Moon medals to unlock the last few required levels. This is an almost universal complaint about Sonic Unleashed, that you're forced to go back into these levels and collect medals to progress. You need quite a few of them to beat the game, which can require a lot of busy work, combing through the levels for them. It's one of the reasons people prefer the other version of Unleashed, since medals are optional collectibles you receive for getting S ranks, opening up fun little platforming segments in the Gaia gates. It would probably have been more fun for me if S ranking those games was even a little harder than it is. As someone who likes to explore and collect stuff in video games, blame these games. I've never really cared all that much. These medals are pretty well hidden and fun to find, like the red rings of future games. Even with that mindset, I would still run into the Atabat problem and need to go back for a few more medals. It's a fairly steep requirement. And that was because I had never engaged with anything other than the core levels. On this playthrough, I decided to talk to people, help them out with their problems, and was surprised to find that they had mini challenge levels that gave you medals. There were a ton of side acts I hadn't discovered before in these surprisingly large Gaia Gate hubs, which had a bunch more medals to collect. Suddenly it was like I had uncovered a whole new game hiding underneath the surface, and the reason I'd never discovered it before was because I was too focused on the core gameplay. What happened then when I engaged with all this stuff? When I checked out those side acts, when I helped out the townsfolk, when I just let myself stop and smell the roses? Turns out I had more than enough Sun and Moon medals. In this, Sonic Unleashed is suggesting something. The planet's broken, it's in pieces, and you need to restore it. That is not achieved solely by running through the main levels and delivering all the Chaos Emeralds. It's done by appreciating the world in which you're trying to save. It's a philosophy that seemingly runs counter to the main levels, where you're supposed to race through them. You see what the game's doing then, don't you? Sonic is the yin, and the Werehog is the yang. You need both approaches to save the world. Sonic started life with a duality of his own, a clear nature versus machine conflict. Green Hill Zone is your first view into this world, lush waterfalls and plant life, beset by the occasional badnik. You transition from the tranquil beauty of South Island into the manifestation of what Eggman will do to it if you don't stop him. Your reward for collecting all the Chaos Emeralds is to plant a bunch of flowers next to the animals you rescue from the badniks. Eventually, those emeralds would transform Sonic into a powered-up state, which he would use to protect the planet. Sonic's an eco-warrior. You could think of him as the planet's protector, fighting against the mecha-apocalypse that is Eggman. As the series progressed, the environmental angle slowly fell by the wayside. Animals stopped popping out of badniks, instead focusing on the philosophical contrast between the two nemeses, the free spirit versus the authoritarian ruler. What I love about the road trip structure of Unleashed is that it once again emphasizes Sonic's love of the planet. Though it may be splintered, Sonic still delights in being able to travel the world and see its sights while he does the repair job. Through this world adventure, we get to know the planet he aims to protect. We get to see its beauty in the levels we race through. We relax in the Greek-inspired country of Apatos, surrounded by white and blue. We sprint across the red tile rooftops of the French and Italian-inspired Spagonia. We chill in the glacial peaks and clear blue sea of the Antarctic-inspired Holoska. The countries chosen to be represented in Unleashed are lovingly depicted, and the levels that take place in them are some of the most memorable vistas in the series. While Sonic did start out in more imaginative zones like Green Hill and Spring Yard, it is also a series which has constantly referenced and sought to emulate our real world. Casino Night is a more dramatized adaptation of Las Vegas, with its neon signs and skyscrapers, just as Chemical Plant and Oil Ocean are reminiscent of industrial plants and oil rigs. Sonic 3 went a step further with zones like Ice Cap and Sandopolis more or less representing our real world before the adventure games cemented that vision. Even then, they still snuck in levels like Lost World and Pumpkin Hill. Unleashed is the apex of this verisimilitude, while taking creative liberties with the humans inhabiting these countries. This trajectory makes a certain kind of sense, since Sonic was once Sega's foremost mascot, and they used him as a benchmark to market their powerful hardware. Part of the reason Sonic kept getting faster is because they wanted to use blast processing to battle Nintendo in the games market. In some ways, the evolution of his games has been tied to the technology he existed on. When it came time to develop in 3D, using this power to make lifelike areas for the Dreamcast was a pretty natural next step. It's a shame it didn't quite work out for them in the way they hoped it would, but it certainly left a legacy and direction for Sonic to loosely follow. And hey, I think it paid off tenfold here. I mean, just do something a little out there. And maybe while you're in the daytime levels, try slowing down a bit, wander around, take some pathways you wouldn't normally take, breathe in the scenic route, soak in the incredible music for a while. It's impressive how much detail's been poured into levels that you're meant to blaze through at breakneck speeds. Just as you can and should try to speedrun the Werehog levels after you engage with their slower, more methodical approach, you should learn to do the inverse with the daytime levels. Go out of your way to find some of those medals. They'll teach you things about these levels you'll never have noticed before. Let me ask you something. What fundamentally separates Sonic and the Werehog? This might register to you as an obvious question with an obvious answer. One of them's slow and the other's fast. Yeah? In a very literal sense, that is true. The Werehog cannot travel as quickly as Sonic can, and needs to find other ways through levels as a result. The idea is treated as a cardinal sin. Sonic's built on his speed. You can't make a game where he doesn't run fast. Look how that turned out for Sonic Labyrinth. Has anyone actually played Sonic Labyrinth? I've never been able to see Unleashed this way. I have always seen the Werehog as an immovable piece to this puzzle, and so I don't like talking about them as if they both exist in a vacuum. Sonic Unleashed is deliberately designed in such a way that you shoot back and forth between them, highlighting the ways in which they contrast each other, and what that might say about the duality of light and dark. Sonic's transformation into the Werehog is brought about by Dark Gaia's energy. It takes hold at night, which is the only time Dark Gaia's influence over the planet can be felt. The night is where the unknown breeds, and where anxieties take root. In Robert Louis Stevenson's horror classic, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we encounter a very similar situation. Dr. Jekyll uses a potion to turn into Mr. Hyde, committing heinous acts during the dead of night. At first, these entities are viewed as distinct by Dr. Jekyll's associates, until it becomes clear at the end of the story that Jekyll and Hyde are one and the same. Hyde was a part that no one, not even himself, was ever able or willing to see. He buried that aspect of himself deep down in order to win the favor of Victorian London's upper class. Conformity was a natural state of being, so this story was extremely shocking when it released. And like all good art, Mr. Hyde represents a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If there ever was a franchise to be ridiculed for its earnestness and encouraged to repress the more daring aspects of its identity, it would be Sonic the Hedgehog. We've seen what happens when Shadow the Hedgehog uses a gun, when Sonic wields a sword, and when he transforms into a wolf. That stuff simply isn't allowed. And hey, even I might take part in a good-natured ribbing. Shadow the Hedgehog is as funny as it can be surprisingly touching, yet a lot of critics at the time didn't find much more in the Werehog other than cacophonous laughter and a cynical dismissal. Ironically, the Werehog is a transformation that Sonic doesn't really seem to mind all that much. There's a small scene where Amy doesn't recognize him that bums him out a little bit, but for the most part, Sonic is entirely unbothered by a forced transformation that robs him of his speed. Sonic, a character that personifies the wind, still manages to put on a brave face when he can no longer command it. What does that say about him? What does that say about us? Maybe we heap too many of our own expectations onto franchises like this. One could ask, where are all of Sonic's friends? Unleashed includes Tails and Amy in minor roles, but for the most part, it is about Sonic. You would imagine characters like Shadow caring a bit about the planet being broken into pieces, but he never shows up, nor does Gun, even though they seem to have an express interest in protecting the planet. This story simply is not concerned with those characters, and for fans like myself who grew up playing the previous 3D games, it was a bit of a jarring change of pace. I'm sure this was also the case for one Ian Flynn, who decided to adapt Unleashed into the Archie comics as the first arc of their rebooted continuity, and in so doing, attempt to answer these questions. This piece of Unleashed has a lot of baggage, given its 250-some issues into a comic with a pre-established menagerie of characters who share the spotlight with the ones we know and love from the games. In that way, it also feels pretty disconnected from the mainline video games, using their general plot beats as a roadmap, while exploring the themes and ideas that its version of the world is interested in pursuing. A lot more space has to be dedicated to characters like Amy, Knuckles, the Freedom Fighters, Eggman, his generals, the Hooligans, Espio, Cream, Gemerl, and Mighty, to name a few. Is juggling so many characters that they have to keep Shadow out of the main comic and put his stories in Sonic Universe so they have room to breathe alongside everyone else. As such, it can often make the story beats from the game feel like an afterthought. We still travel the world and collect keys to open Gaia gates, but Chip feels like more of a secondary character, introduced halfway into the overarching story and only getting a few arcs with Sonic before his sacrifice. I had the most fun reading the loose adaptation of Sonic the Fighters that happens here for some reason, a chaotic melting pot of Sonic characters all fighting to share the spotlight. Want to thank it real quick for introducing me to Breezy, one of my new favorite Sonic characters. She has the duplicitous charm of Rouge, which she uses to stand toe-to-toe with Eggman. She's running a tournament for a Chaos Emerald, which she uses for her own material gain, even while the world's been split in half. No matter who she's talking to, it's like she somehow has the upper hand, and you never really know what she's planning. It was fun to watch her evolution from Eggman crony to capitalist entrepreneur, and it also breathes some life into Casino Park from Sonic Heroes, where this story takes place. Ian Flynn has this wonderful ability to pull in so many elements of the games and make them work together. I'm not going to be able to play Sonic Heroes in quite the same way now, because I'm always going to be thinking of this fun story arc. He even pulls elements exclusively from the SD version of Unleashed, where the townsfolk are set up to be guardians of the Gaia temples, fleshing out some of their stories. You can tell he loves these games. That passion is pouring out of the pages. I don't know that this story fares quite as well when it's exploring Sonic as a character and how the Werehog transforms him. In the comic, he accidentally inhales some Dark Gaia research and is constantly battling against the emerging demon inside, reassuring everyone that everything's fine in the meanwhile. There's this wonderful build-up with several situations where stress and anxiety overwhelm him as he teeters on the edge of losing his cool. When it finally does happen, it's fitting that Mighty's the one to battle him and try to snap him back to his senses, as he recently went through a battle against his own worst impulses. Sonic's Werehog transformation amplifies what's inside him, as explained by Sally. Sonic is someone who will always do what he thinks is right, and when his perception of the world is warped, and he interprets everything everyone says in bad faith, it causes him to lash out because he no longer knows what the right answer is. It's a fairly relatable struggle as someone who similarly battles against a feeling of helplessness and lack of control over my own anxieties, and I was excited to see where this storyline was going to go. Unfortunately, Sonic receives off-screen therapy and pretty much instantly becomes okay with the Werehog transformation, making this whole storyline feel like a strange formality so that Sonic could uncritically turn into the Werehog and smack some badniks. From then on, it turns into a series of battles for the Gaia Keys, with a few moments of drama for the Freedom Fighters until the final battle happens, where we get several issues of characters fighting, with Sonic and Chip beating up Dark Gaia. There's a concerted effort to make sure every character has something to do, but it's hard to connect with the conflict when it doesn't feel like there's much of a thematic thread to follow. Perhaps then it was for the best that we reduce our cast, putting the spotlight on Sonic and Chip. After all, this is a story about Sonic and his relationship to the planet. Chip is Light Gaia, a manifestation of the planet who battles against Dark Gaia in a cycle of death and rebirth. Sonic helps this little dude recover his memories, seeing the world and everything that makes it beautiful along the way. Sonic, then, is healing the planet in more than a physical sense. He's hanging out with it, showing it what it means to feel, what it means to live. Is there room in that kind of story for Knuckles or Shadow, Should they be included in this story for the sake of consistency within some kind of continuity? Should we make references to areas like Station Square or Green Hill Zone just to make sure everyone knows that these countries exist in the same world? Or perhaps we just ignore all of that and let the game tell its story, regardless of our preconceived expectations. Eggman Land is my favorite level in any Sonic game. It is wonderfully unforgiving, indulgently long, and brings together two seemingly disparate playstyles for the home stretch. Eggman Land is the culmination of everything Eggman as a character has been building up to. In much the same way you can view Scrap Brain Zone as what he will eventually turn South Island into, you can view Eggman Land as what he wants to turn the planet into. A series of death traps under the guise of an amusement park, coated in crimson under a barrier of pollution that blots out the sky. There are carousels of fire and roller coasters that careen off the tracks. Eggman's face is plastered everywhere. You cannot escape his megalomaniacal influence. In a game of contrasts, this is an ugly manifestation of how Eggman views this world. Cold, soulless, and terrifying. In order to combat its challenges, Sonic needs to channel this harmony you've built inside him as a player, switching back and forth between his forms. It's an uncompromising challenge for both styles of play and the ultimate test of the different skills you've developed. This level stares you in the face and shows you that these two styles of play aren't actually so different after all. Neither of them are inherently superior. You carry this energy straight to the fight with the Egg Dragoon, right after finishing the level with the Werehog. It's like the level itself hasn't even ended yet. Eggman Land is simply the prologue to the finale. The Egg Dragoon's a visually spectacular fight, where you clash with Eggman while you both plummet towards the center of the Earth. Chip uses the Gaia Temples to form a giant Colossus, which takes on the boost, punch, and guard mechanics of the two playstyles, fusing them into one while Daytime Sonic runs through the Colossus's arms as if they were their own levels, in an attempt to reach Dark Gaia's eyes. This ends with a supersonic fight to defeat Dark Gaia, set to an orchestral redux of the game's main theme, Endless Possibility. It's one of those finales that has to be played to be understood. There are simply no words I can use to do this section justice, just as there are no words I can place to explain why this opening animation never fails to give me goosebumps, and why I still get a tad misty-eyed when Chip seals Dark Gaia away to begin the cycle anew. One of the reasons these moments work so well for me is that they do not exist in a vacuum. This opening cutscene spells out a type of game which goes against what you'd typically expect. Starting out with a supersonic battle you would usually see at the end of a Sonic game before pulling out the rug from under you and having Eggman win, forcing a hideous transformation onto Sonic that robs him of his signature speed. You then get to grips with this power as Sonic uses it to his advantage, surrounded by characters who give in to Dark Gaia's energies, amplifying their negative emotions. Sonic, afflicted with the same curse, doesn't let it stop him from helping those around him. You help people around the world, lifting their spirits while you see the sights. It's a journey of ups and downs, thrills and chills, culminating in a finale where all emotions are felt at once. Excitement, tension, doubt, triumph, sadness, and acceptance. I don't think it's a coincidence that you're not given much time to dwell on Chip's sacrifice. Sonic picks up his ring and starts running again, off to his next journey. Of course, it's sad that Chip is gone, but he was the catalyst for an amazing adventure. It's only natural to feel sad when he's gone, but you can't let those feelings consume you like Dark Gaia almost did to the planet. You gotta keep moving, day by day, step by step. That sentiment, it's more and more relatable by the day. To me, that's more Sonic than anything else. A game that tries to be new and different, rolling with the consequences of those radical decisions, and maybe using those to its advantage for an unforgettable playthrough. It's a series that has no ceiling, that can do and be anything. And I know that's a sentiment not everyone agrees with. I know there are tons of Sonic fans who want him to be a certain way. They want a 3D Sonic that's more closely aligned with a classic vision, or they want playable characters who play just like him with their own little gimmicks. They have a goal in mind for him. But my desires have always been rather nebulous on that point. I can't help but think back to that original game again. I've referenced it a lot throughout this video. That's partly because Unleashed reminds me so much of it. This argument about the Werehog's place in Sonic, whether or not it fits, brings to mind my own complicated relationship with slower zones like Marble and Labyrinth. It's easy to forget, but Sonic set a foundation that wasn't exclusively about speed or momentum or anything people attribute to him these days. It's hard to look at it without the baggage of years of games iterating upon it. That might be the reason I've always struggled to fully enjoy it. Those preconceived notions about what Sonic should be, and how those slower zones don't quite fit. Which is a hell of a thing to claim about the first Sonic game. I went back to that original while writing this video, and it struck me that maybe these zones had a purpose? I kind of appreciate how Labyrinth Zone was a way to twist expectations and introduce a force that not even Sonic can blitz his way through. It's a fun way to introduce the Hedgehog's fatal weakness, a level that sticks in your brain and gets you thinking about it. Is that such a bad thing? To not sand away these rough edges, continually pushing the games toward this pure, refined ideal? That's a genuine question, by the way. I don't really know if there is a truth to that question. What I do know is, if Sonic could only ever be one thing, we wouldn't have Unleashed. Worse yet, we wouldn't have separate versions of Unleashed, each doing their own thing. Sonic Unleashed is about duality, light and dark, polar opposites. It's natural to feel friction here, and I get why so many people wouldn't like that friction. For me, though, Sonic will always be partly defined by that friction. I love it. I can't get enough of it. I adore when Sonic is wacky. I love when he picks up a sword, I cheer when Shadow grabs his gun, and I smile when Sonic transforms into the Werehog. I'll be the first person to ask them to do another wild shakeup like the Werehog, even if no one will agree with me. That's alright. This one's for me. In my eyes, Sonic works best when he has no limitations. It fits his character and fuels his enduring spirit. He embodies the dream of endless possibilities. If you, like me, think far too much about the thematic coherence of Sonic the Hedgehog and the power of his video games, you might be interested in another video I made. I created my own pitch for a Sonic Generations I would make if I had the power to, and I am pretty proud of the idea. I think it's really cool. Here's a snippet. The next level Sonic finds himself in is Prison Island from Shadow the Hedgehog. Now, I know this will be a strange pick, but hear me out. If you like what you hear, I have several other videos talking about games like Pokerogue, TCG Pocket and Gambling, Astrobot and PlayStation's Legacy, and the tragic irony of Hi-Fi Rush. I will continue to make additional videos like this as the creative part of my brain begins to leak. I can't keep all this stuff in my head. You can go watch those over on Nebula. I think if you're into the stuff I'm writing here on YouTube, this will be right up your alley. Nebula allows for me to create fun ideas like this, which wouldn't make as much sense here on the channel. Nebula also has a separate brand of original content called Originals, which can include audio dramas and documentaries. However, it also includes new Lindsay Ellis videos, if you've been missing some of her incredible stuff. Recently I watched her video on the Lord of the Rings movie adaptation, which is a fascinating look into how the movies actually made a ton of changes from the book, and how those changes made sense and contributed to a better adaptation. It's a really fun deep dive into the movies, I highly recommend it, and it's only a drop in the bucket compared to how many other fun originals there are. I swear I find something new to watch all the time. Other creators like Jacob Geller are also part of Nebula. He recently made an exclusive video as part of the Nebula Plus brand of exclusive content, in which he discusses how he creates his video essays. There's a ton of great advice in here, much of which I have followed myself for the nearly 10 years that I've been writing videos. It's invaluable advice from one of the best essayists on the platform, so you should definitely go check it out if you're interested in making videos like this yourself. You can watch this and those other videos I mentioned exclusively over on Nebula. That's why I'm proud to be a part of Nebula, a streaming service delivering exciting new artistic works. If you're looking to check out what the site has to offer, you can use my link below to check out my channel, which will have every video I release on YouTube, as well as my exclusive videos like my aforementioned video on the ideal pitch for Sonic Generations. Using my link, you'll get 40% off a yearly plan, which shakes out to $36 a year or $3 a month. You could also choose a monthly plan at $6 a month, or go for a lifetime plan for $300. All of this using my link below. New paid subscribers also receive guest passes to give out to others, so if you end up loving it, you can invite friends and family to check it out free of charge. No credit card information required. And for those of you that want to share everything Nebula has to offer with your family and friends, Nebula is now offering annual gift cards. Use the link gift.nebula.tv/KingK to give a year of Nebula to a friend for just $36. I think you'll all really enjoy what Nebula has to offer if you give it an honest chance. It's a bright beacon of creative hope in an increasingly dark and stormy independent creator landscape. So go check it out now at nebula.tv/KingK, and I'll see you there.